long, well.
Jordan. So my groan just got on. Wait a minute. I got a sound problem here. Okay. All right. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
All right. What a start to the evening. But anyway, maybe we'll gather some people. We've already got 5. Good evening, Justin. So anyway, tonight we're going to talk about the archetypes of the collective unconscious. Now, this is a very early essay by Jung. I'm just looking to see if I can figure out when it was, and they don't date it.
There's a footnote that says this essay was written in 1916, but then revised in 43.
Oh, okay. You saw that someplace?
I believe it was in this. It might have been in the former chapter, but yeah, on page 94, there's a footnote number 2, written in 1916, superfluous to remark that it is still true today, 1943.
Okay, but what I don't know is whether the archetypes of the collective unconscious is the same per se as what he finally put into his entire volume of Archetypes of the Collective Unconscious, which was in volume 9.1 of the collected works. But do you happen to know, Jordan, or can you hear me, Jordan?
There you are. Yeah, I can hear you. It's perplexing to me because I remember when I read the Archetypes of the Collective Unconscious, when I was in the middle of all 22 volumes, there was a this came much earlier, and then it resonated as later, so that Nick, you say in 1916 and then revised successively in 1943 makes sense. I'm not sure though. I think volume 9.1, yes, but I believe, but
I don't recall this essay being in there because that book is focused. It has a significant. I mean, there's
well, the whole book is called this, though.
Yeah, but it's a slightly different approach because he goes through the mother archetype, archetypal symbolism in fairy tales, the psychology of the core in Greek mythology, and then mandala symbolism is the final section of the book. So I don't think this is in there.
Yeah. Okay,
well, and there was even a smaller,
so in other words,
chapbook version of mandala symbolism in the collected works also that was standalone.
Right. So anyway, this is different, it appears. And, although there some of the ideas may be the same, I suspect that the book written 30 years later is quite different from this one and this essay. Nonetheless, we will read it. Now, there are a couple ideas about the collective unconscious which I came across recently, and I hadn't seen them before. I mean, I may have read them before, but the penny didn't drop. Okay, one of the ideas is that a lot of young men especially have come onto this website and say, well, I want to individuate. I'm going to individuate, but they have no idea what that means. And what it does mean is that it is the opposite of being in the collective. So the idea is that that you have to differentiate yourself from the collective, and you have to figure out what your particular your particular calling in life is going to be. And it usually means having to pull yourself out of the collective. unless you're going to be, the star football player who individuates by being the star for 20 years, which not everybody can do. I mean, that's definitely a calling also. But the ones that can't, they end up in, the great collective of used NFL football players, usually about age 30. And then they have to figure out what they're going to do with their lives. And that's an issue for many.
I think there's an important caveat to people out there, younger, older, whoever's looking at individuation, to make sure they don't get set off of that individuation path when someone says, oh, all that individualism. I mean, because there's a lot of people who don't know Jung and will dismiss it because it's almost like someone saying, oh, that's so simplistic. And I'm like, it's not overgeneralized. That has a negative connotation. You mean it's not simple? It doesn't have simplicity. So there's a similarity in the word individualism and individuation, and they do not mean the same thing.
Yeah, they definitely do not. They definitely do not. Okay, and the other thing that I wanted to mention, which I've read recently and was a bit of a surprise to me, is that the collective unconscious is spread before us and we have not recognized it. And so I hate to admit that this rat's nest of my workstation here, which I'm not going to show because it's so bad, is reflective of my unconscious, but it surely is. In other words, I have many different things in here, but I'm starting to understand that my golden threads are something special that isn't in this heap of stuff. I mean, I literally I had 2 stacks of books next to me on my bookcase, and about a week ago, they all fell off, and a bunch of them fell behind the bookcase and so on. And I haven't even looked down to pick them up as yet, because I'm so focused, laser focused on this golden thread that I'm working on, and my dictum is that golden thread isn't in any of the things that I don't have right in front of me. Then that's my life, my individuation, right? Where I'm just understanding that it doesn't matter if I can't have a clean desk. In fact, I have a dictum, which is never trust anybody with a clean desk. but beyond that,
I had a client.
It does represent my unconscious individually, and then as I think about this, then everything else that is spread before us represents the collective unconscious of all humanity.
Can I make a quick
go ahead.
comment here? I recently listened to a talk between Jeffrey Mishlove, who conducts the YouTube channel New Thinking Aloud, and I want to say he's Swiss or maybe a Dutch.
You're thinking of Bernardo Castro.
Right. I watched his second most recent talk released with Jeffrey Mishlove, and he was talking about, I think the talk was titled Jungian Metaphysics, which is interesting in and of itself, because Jung claims at so many points in his career, based on his reliance on Kant and his personal thought, that he's not a metaphysician and he abhors metaphysics. But it's also really interesting that Castro makes a claim in that same interview where, there you go.
Actually, this is the book. I saw that video and immediately ordered his book.
I would like to get it as well. but it was really, really profound to hear how he's kind of drawing on, I think it was Schopenhauer and also some of Schilling's ideas that we can't know a thing in itself. Like I can see my dog sitting in front of me, but I can't know the subjective state of my dog.
Yeah.
In the same way that there might be things in the unconscious that may not belong to me, and I can't necessarily know them. I can have an experience of them in dreams or active imagination, but I can't control their thoughts, or I can't go into their psyche, but they can seemingly come into mine. And that was a really, really interesting analogy. I mean, I don't think he was saying literally that the physical world is the collective unconscious, but that they're certainly analogous to one another. That was.
You want to opine on this, Jordan?
Well, I think yes. And then I think the collective unconscious most primarily exists in the voids, the interstices, the synapses, the spaces between the physical world things. So both and, not one without the other, but primarily I think that dark void or the abyss, all those different synonyms for the space between all of us. That's where things come into connection. And I think that's where the collective unconscious and the personal unconscious mix. But I agree, that's interesting, Nick. You say, you can subjectively experience your dog, but not get in your dog's head. And then vice versa, the same, not contrariwise, but your dog, neither you. But the experiences can influence each other, which is an ingoing, but it's not like a mind read kind of getting in there to literally road trip around someone else's psyche.
Yeah, I think another way of saying it is I can never indwell anything other than myself. I can never be the guitar in my room. I can never be my dog. So I can have an experience of it, but it's still filtered through the lens of my own psyche. So in that same way, it's interesting in the talk with Kastrup, he references the sections in the Red Book where Jung is talking to Philemon and saying, you're just an archetype, you're just a thing that's in my head. And Philemon corrects him and says, no, I have my own life. You don't control me. I'm not subject to your control or your thoughts.
Yeah.
And I think there's also, when you brought that up, it came to mind, let's say your dog, in a sense, in your psyche, your dog is a symbol and potentially personified to a degree so that you understand it from your perspective. But at the same time, there's often, it's like translating through the artist's eyes or the indigenous person's eyes, where you're not writing from white man, you're writing from their perspective as much as you can to empathically get in there. So I think there's a combination of the things around us existing symbolically, and then also actually in their whole universe of a world within themselves. Again, the infinite symbol at
certainly
that point.
Are a world within themselves. So what I see driving down the road is I see grocery stores and drugstores and churches and other people's homes, and I can't get inside any of them, but they all represent the sum total of everything that those people have lived. And the grocery store represents the sum total of how we think we need to get our sustenance at this point in time. And in the old days that was by hunting, but nowadays we get it by going to the grocery store, and it's nicely packaged for us and all that stuff.
Well, and that's an interestingly large point too, Skip, because I know when I taught underprivileged kids in college, I did a martial arts program over summers for a program called YOU, Youth Opportunities Unlimited, and they would scholarship all these inner city kids in. And what's interesting is that I remember when I took them over to the university garden, and I pulled a carrot out of the ground and I brushed it off and I took a bite. And one of the kids was like, "Oh my God, that's dirty." And I said, "Well, this is carrot." He goes, "Yeah, but they're not supposed to come from the ground." And I went, "Well, what do you mean?" And he was indignant. He said, "Oh, no, they come from cardboard boxes in the back of the store. My brother works there. I see him stalking." So as if the carrots originated in the back of the grocery store, magical
Right.
thinking attached there. But
Yeah, sure.
but it was interesting because the perspective got that can't get inside the idea properly all wrong. And further
Yeah.
than, you not being able to get in that person's house.
Yeah, man, I think that the one thing that's particularly interesting, if you go to grocery stores all over the country or all over the world, even, they're essentially the same.
Mhm.
And uh, they're a little different in a place like Japan or India, let's suppose. Um, but on the other hand, they're still doing the same thing. The same function is happening, and the same result is happening. Human beings are getting nourished, and very few people in India are going out and hunting for anything, let alone
Hunting for the grocery list.
yeah, not at all. And so it's nice to see Jewel here. She said she was feeling poorly, so I won't hassle you, Jewel, unless you want to uncloak. But anyway, okay, so let's go and read this chapter and see what we can get out of it. I don't know what, but anyway, you want to go for it, Nick? With
Sure.
Paragraph 141.
Yeah. We are now faced with the task of raising to the subjective level the phenomena which have so far been understood on the objective level. For this purpose, we must detach them from the object and take them as symbolical exponents of the patient's subjective complexes. If we try to interpret the figure of Miss X on the subjective level, we must regard it as the personification of a part soul, or rather of a certain aspect of the dreamer. Miss X then becomes an image of what the patient would like to be and yet fears to be. She represents, as it were, a partial picture of the patient's future character. The fascinating artist cannot so easily be raised to the subjective level because the unconscious artistic capacity lying dormant in the patient is already taken up by Miss X. It would, however, be correct to say that the artist is the image of the patient's masculinity, which is not consciously realized and therefore lies in the unconscious. Footnote here stating, I have called this masculine element in women the animus and the corresponding feminine element in the man the anima. See also Emma Jung on the nature of the animus. This is true in the sense that the patient does in fact delude herself in this matter. In her own eyes, she is quite remarkably fragile, sensitive, and feminine, and not in the least masculine. She was therefore indignantly amazed when I pointed out her masculine traits. But the strange, fascinating element is out of keeping with these traits. It seems to be entirely lacking to them. Yet it must be hiding somewhere, since she produced this feeling out of herself.
Yeah. Jordan, you want to comment on this?
I thought it was interesting that she was surprised when he pointed out her masculine traits and that she was so indignantly relating herself to the feminine, and that indignance or stubbornness aspect, kind of bullish in a way. It's a little low grade, but it's also typically masculine. And I think that it's interesting that the overarching mode of being of her femininity was expressed in a masculine form, very, very forcefully, very, very assertively, in a way where as if it was the only thing. And that's more, again, low grade masculine, not evolved. But at the same time, those components seem to be at play here, where what's unseen at the larger scale is really her animus that's driving her feminine qualities.
Yeah, in certain ways. It's both, but most people are not thinking of that. I mean, if they're a woman, they think I'm a girl, right? They don't think of themselves as masculine.
Right.
And you can see it especially in younger girls under 12 who play with the boys and play just as tough with the boys. and they actually get pretty annoyed when they find out that they have a somewhat different role to play in life. And oh, by the way, it's on them to reproduce the species somehow. And the men aren't going to have to do that. And I remember one woman that was in my group said, "Yeah, we were mad when we found out."
Well, you're right. It can create, especially then, it creates a kind of getting T-boned or blindsided yoke that's put upon them, that everything was fun and games and there was equality and they simply had to practice and do their things and get better. And just like the boys, and then all of a sudden there's this other thing that's yoked on them as a choice that they kind of didn't have a choice about.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Would it be okay with you if I included just a few details from the previous chapter?
Sure. Go ahead.
Okay. So throughout this, I haven't read the entire chapter that we're reading tonight, but I read at least the first several pages that we will cover tonight. And throughout the entire chapter, he's referring to this dream that a woman patient of his had. So here's the dream. She is about to cross a wide river. There is no bridge, but she finds a ford where she can cross. She is on the point of doing so when a large crab that lay hidden in the water seizes her by the foot and will not let her go.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the dream of the patient. But then not only is he referring to that dream in the chapter that we're reading tonight, but also this interesting identification that she's taken up with a friend of hers, Miss X, and a friend of Miss X who was an artist. So here's a detail along those lines. Let's see here. So there may be a hint of identification with Miss X. You must therefore follow this up. The patient relates the following facts about her. Miss X was widowed early. She was very merry and full of life. She had a series of adventures with men, and one in particular with an extremely gifted artist whom the patient knew personally and who always impressed her as remarkably fascinating and strange. An identification can occur only on the basis of some unrealized, i.e. unconscious similarity. Now, in what way is our patient similar to Mrs. X? So I just thought that was necessary because he's going to talk about Miss X a lot here and try to figure out in what way is she unconsciously identified with this woman.
Yeah. Okay. You want to read the next paragraph, Jordan? I'm going to jump up and grab a drawing of Tim's that I happen to have.
Okay. Paragraph 142. Whenever such an element is not to be found in the dreamer himself, experience tells us that it is always projected. But upon whom? Is it still attached to the artist? He has long since disappeared from the patient's purview and cannot very well have taken the projection with him, since it lies anchored in the unconscious of the patient. And moreover, she had no personal relationship with this man, despite his fascination. For her, he was more a figure of fantasy. No, a projection of this kind is always topical. That is, somewhere there must be somebody upon whom this content is projected. Otherwise, she would be palpably aware of it in herself. Thoughts?
Well, I mean, it brings up a sticky situation, but it's also just really foreshadowing for the situation that he's about to get into in the coming chapter. So I don't know if I can really say anything without commenting on those paragraphs.
Well, I think you're right. He's foreshadowing the complexity he's going to get into, because even the statement, otherwise she would be palpably aware of it in herself. Well, one of the natures of projection is that you're not aware of it in yourself. You're aware of it as being put upon someone else unconsciously. When you're really in your on the unawares manner. But you're right. He's foreshadowing what he's about to get to, because it's going to get a little more both and a little more calculus of the interrelated, whereas not being just an if then P, if P then Q kind of logic.
Yeah, and I've got to say the coming paragraphs are among the most impressive from this book so far, because it really it shows how complex of a process Jung was working in with his patients. I mean, it's easy to follow, but to imagine oneself sitting there and trying to work through all of this in real time is really a tall order.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, we're talking about young women and their sort of shock at puberty. And this drawing that Tim did sort of sums it up. I just want to show it here. I'm going to uncloak for a moment while I show it. So here's the drawing. And the drawing is called She Enters the Way. So you see this figure here is going into, the constricting nature of civil society. Obviously, she's been in the light in her youth, but now she has to enter this tunnel and this very restricting set of buildings. And anyway, Tim called it She Enters the Way. And,
I don't want to call Jewel out. I know she's not feeling so well, but from a woman's perspective, how this lands, the puberty, the shock at puberty, that the onset of one of your choices is to continue the progeny, so to speak. But I'm not sure if Jewel can chime in just without.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I can see you, but you can't see me. I can't figure it out.
right.
Yes.
And here comes Annabelle, by the way. So why don't you wait until Annabelle gets here too?
I'll take a breath. I've been listening to you and wanting to jump in. I didn't think you could talk. I worked on another computer. Yes, Jordan, I want to say something.
Yeah, okay. Shoot.
Excellent.
At least
Good
we
evening.
Annabelle.
Oh, Nick and Jordan, you were missed last week.
Thank you. You as well.
Nice to see you again.
Jordan, did you have some fires or was there some emergency?
I went to the beach.
Oh, excuse me.
my sister and I decided I flew out to surprise my mom because my sister got a big house on the beach. So yeah, it was the opposite of fires. It was
Okay.
planned fun. And actually Monday I was supposed to be here, but my flight was canceled on Sunday, and so I got one, but so I was still in the airport when you guys started.
So Annabelle, we were talking about this drawing of Tim's. I guess I have to.
Yeah, if you drop out your background, I'll be able to see it better.
Yeah. Okay.
And Happy New Year, Nick and Jordan.
Happy New Year.
Yeah. So this is called She Enters the Way. And
is that a sort of covered bridge, or is it just
it's a bridge, maybe over a moat into a build up castle sort of thing. But obviously she's been in the light. Now she has to go into the dark.
Yes.
And so anyway, that's what I had shown just before you came. So
thank you.
And Jewel is going to respond now. So Jewel, go for it.
Okay. Well, it's going to be a little bit more than that. Okay.
Yeah.
Verses are, but before that, you were talking conscious and unconscious, and I heard everyone's comments.
Right.
I really took all of that in. But for me, it even helped me to differentiate what I personally am currently in a new way, which is my unconscious, which means my life experience and the generations before me, which I alluded to last week, and all that I learned through them that was brought forth from those generations. And were still very much alive. I will say all of it in my mother, plus her wounds, the wounded inner child. And I decided I was going to become the hero. Then there were male and female roles you were talking about earlier. My mother had another idea for me, and did not protect me from situations, but took me on into a trajectory that was acceptable for that period of life. And the light and the dark of it to you now, Jordan. Thank you for that. I do remember about puberty, and I will be very, very specific with a personal experience. Is my mother told me one day, she said, there's a thing called menstruation, and you'll have to wear a pad. And I don't know much more beyond that. And that's when I pulled out Webster and a friend and that's how I got educated.
Oh, boy.
And that's not a good way to go and then be in relationships and not understanding what's happening from a male perspective, a female's perspective, and drives that go with it, and boundaries that are being violated, and all of that. So there is both a light and a dark in it. And that's why I'm so happy to be here in the year 2022, that I can say communication and education are so important.
So bringing things into consciousness, obviously, which is
Exactly. And so
we're trying to do.
And exactly. And as I mentioned last week, I mentioned my age only for those people that cannot see me, my age. So they'll know I'm not this young something another. I have white hair. How's that? That's better than the number. And that's why I want to spread into a wider conscious than the family that rejects my new belief systems, that are here who are hungry for it, a perspective of how to change. And y'all are talking about that and doing it through sharing common experiences, agreeing to disagree, and also sharing our life experiences and understanding of where we are today. So thank you.
Yeah.
Today I'm working in the light with you. If I go talk to the family, I'll be working in the dark. Okay. I will be the dark one. I will be the dark horse. Okay. So that's it.
Yeah. Interesting.
And yeah. And I will say one other thing about light and dark, because it has many contexts. Because I have chosen to leave the church, which I did not grow up in, but did introduce my children to. I'm probably going to hell now, but that's okay. I have good dreams for my futures now, because I'd already lived in hell. And so now
there's the hell on earth of the self-righteous fundamentalist. I
got it. And so that's where the light and the dark, you opened it up, Jordan. That's why it's such a wide thing, but I'm going to get us back to where we were, was with Carl Jung and the light and the dark.
Yeah.
Which is yes.
You can't go, you're not going to go to hell. You're either in it or you're not.
I lived there. I'm on a Christian retreat center, and they are the only angels.
Well, it's like Oscar Wilde. I think Oscar Wilde, someone told Oscar Wilde he was going to go to hell, and he said, I don't want to go to heaven. I don't have any friends there.
Well, now
all my friends are down there. Sign me up, he said.
Well, thank you. Well, I could go to the light side if I would write multiple big checks with lots of zeros behind it and keep my mouth feminine from many generations ago. Yes.
That's funny. Annabelle, do you want to comment here?
Unmute. For me, it's all in the context of this passage I've been through for the last 49 days, which is that my father died 49 days ago. And that is the traditional counting of the passage through the Bardo phases.
Right.
And so for me, many stages of this, my visual image or my conceptualization of it has been a tunnel. And it's been a dark tunnel or a light tunnel or a dark tunnel becoming light or a light tunnel becoming dark at various stages, which includes the readings that I've done. And then it just includes, kind of falling asleep at night or just waking up in the morning of what my image is, because my father has been very present for me during these 49 days. And I have to say that today, I just had a phone call from a friend who lives outside Mendocino, California. I had a letter that was sent to the wrong address and just arrived from someone somewhere else. It's sort of like there are some energy streams that are clearly opening. So when I saw that image, that's another thing I thought of, is that there's that passage my father has been doing, but there's also the passage that I'm doing.
Right.
So the passage I'm doing is now opening some doors.
Have you been reading the Tibetan Book of the Dead?
Yes,
during
I
this?
have.
You have been, yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, that's the wrong word for it. It's a cycle because, to be more accurate, because on November 16th of 2021, so that was just slightly more than a year before November 22nd. No, wait, November 16th, 2020, slightly more than a year before November 22nd, 2021. The 2020 November date was when my dog died by lethal injection, which was a very intensive reading of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, because I was really very attached to my 15-year-old dog. And I really was just thrown off and kind of juggling. I'm trying to find a word for that feeling of like, I'm trying reconciling. It was almost like some kind of wizardry that I was trying to get to the bottom of. And I also cried for 10 days, and then I went blind, and then I had 4 ER visits. I mean, all of this, you guys know. And this has been that year of this group and those various Jungian and archetype passages. But it is a year of from one death, which was a reading of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, then kind of putting it aside, but knowing it's right there, and then pulling it out again. So yes, I've been reading it, but I have been reading it again. But I also was given some other interesting books. Here's one that's right by me. And this is apparently a Jungian guy. Now and actually this relates to some things you've talked about, Nick, which is the catafalque Peter Kingsley. Peter Kingsley is very kind of attached to this Richard Strozzi heckler guy in some of his, I would call it refiguring of Jung's thought that catafalque is about, but that I think is another conversation. Whenever it comes up in this group, we sort of talk about it for a moment and then we kind of put it on the shelf. So, but this book, which I already had, The Anatomy of Change, A Way to Move Through Life's Transitions, it's really taken me a while for me to realize I am in a transition.
Yeah. Well,
that really resonates, Annabelle, because I look at February 23rd of 2021, I lost my dad.
Yeah.
And I followed him daily astrologically as a meditation. No words, just I would meditate his chart where by transit from his 12 hours after his death. And then at 49 days, I've never seen a chart like it. Everything was just resting on the bottom. It was, I mean, within 2 houses, everything was just trined and squared, just hanging out. Well, I don't know.
That reminds me of the, what is it? The Lincoln speech, we know these truths to be self-evident. I mean, whenever my Buddhism comes up, I only can ever explain to people that I was standing in a doorway. My Buddhist teacher stepped out of a car. I recognized his robes as being Kaju lineage. He walked up to me and I asked him, "Are you my teacher?" And he said, "Yes." That's all it was. You know, that's truths being self-evident. You know, I knew enough about Buddhism, and I knew from having studied with Chogyam Trungpa, who I knew was not my teacher, but I knew enough about Buddhism. I'd read enough Buddhist texts that I knew that if it's going to happen, it's going to be, and excuse my, flippant use of this term, but Jungian. I knew it was going to be coincidence. I knew it was going to be serendipitous happenstance. And so when this guy gets out, not to mention the fact that all of the 4 people who were accompanying him, I knew, but that's because I knew all these Buddhist people. And one of them was Sam Burkholtz, the publisher of Shambhala, who I knew not only as a Buddhist, but as a fellow, because I'm a fellow, right? Publisher. So, that's,
well, and it's interesting that
these truths to be self-evident. You see, so what you're talking about, that chart would be like that is one of those truths. That's a self-evident truth. You probably could have predicted it. As an astrologer, you probably could have predicted it.
Exactly. And at the same time, too, then a month and a half later, I put my dog down by lethal injection. And, my 130-pound German Shepherd, who was 13, and, just she was pretty much the nucleus. Everything revolved around her walks and her this and everything that. But I followed her, Bardo.
Yes.
And then afterwards, at day 49, day 50, I didn't even think about it at all. It was just disappeared. But but I get this ding ding alert. There's a Subaru I've been looking at. I called them and said, "Consider it sold. Do you want cash?" I mean, and that 50th day.
Is this the greater vehicle or the lesser vehicle? That would be.
Well, yeah, exactly. But what's interesting,
let me know.
So he gives me the address to meet him at his office, right?
Right.
And he said, "I may have to go on an appointment, but if I'm not here, my wife will drive over from her Pilates studio." So I'm thinking, okay, well, where I drove up? The address was the Taos Veterinary Clinic. So was my dog looking out for me, or
Yes.
or so yes. So I mean, and I think that kind of dials back around to the projection point. What did I pour in and pour on out of myself to forget myself, to allow her to influence? And in that whole process, going back to Nick with this last paragraph foreshadows the complex paragraphs coming up, but he kind of opens it up. Okay. But anyway,
let me read the next paragraph, because
right.
I think we got a bit off track here, but not that the deaths of your fathers and
dare you skip
dogs. Yes, these are our dogs and our fathers. What could matter
your dogs
more?
And what could matter more? But by all means, go ahead and chat about those on another channel.
And then there was Mutiny on the Bounty.
But what we did get covered here was synchronicity, which we were both pointing to. So paragraph 143, I'll read that.
Okay.
At this point, we come back to the objective level, for without it, we cannot locate the projection. The patient does not know any man who means anything special to her apart from myself, and as her doctor, I mean a good deal. Presumably, therefore, this content is projected onto me, although I had certainly noticed nothing of the sort. But these subtler contents never appear on the surface. They always come to light outside the consulting hour. I therefore asked her cautiously, "Tell me, how do I seem to you when you are not with me? Am I just the same?" She said, "When I am with you, you are quite pleasant, but when I am by myself or have not seen you for a time, the picture I have of you changes in a remarkable way. Sometimes you seem quite idealized, and then again different." Here she hesitated, and I prompted her, quote, "In what way different?" Then she said, sometimes you seem rather dangerous, sinister, like an evil magician or a demon. I don't know how I ever got such ideas. You are not a bit like that. Okay. Nick, you want to comment about that?
Maybe let's read the next one and then talk about it a bit.
Okay, I'll go on then. So the content was fixed on me as part of the transference, and that is why it was missing from her psychic inventory. Here we recognize another important fact. I was contaminated, identified with the artist. So in her unconscious fantasy, she naturally plays the role of Mrs. X with me. I could easily prove this to her with the help of the material, sexual fantasies previously brought to light, but I myself am then the obstacle, the crab that prevents her from getting across. If in this particular case, we were to confine ourselves to the objective level, the position would be very tricky. What would be the good of my explaining, but I am not this artist in any sense. I am not in the least similar, nor am I an evil magician. What would leave the patient quite cold, for she knows that just as well as I do. The projection continues as before, and I really am the obstacle to her further progress.
I would like to bring this sentence out in the last sentence of the previous paragraph when she says, I don't know how I ever get such ideas. You are not a bit like that. So she has a deep knowing that it's not him, but she hasn't opened up to that it's her yet.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting too. I'm sorry, go ahead, Jewel.
I'll just say two words, conscious and unconscious, to that comment.
Good point.
Yeah, it's really interesting how earlier we had talked about the transference and maybe that being something that was a viable option for analysis, or maybe not required. But here it's interesting that he says in the first line, so the content was fixed on me as a part of the transference, and that is why it was missing from her psychic inventory. And yet she seems to be aware that you are not a bit like that, but it's quite telling that it doesn't seem like it's a purely intellectual endeavor where it's like she may have some knowing or some knowledge that sure you're not like that, but the transference persists just the same. And it can't necessarily.
The truth is that he is a bit like that.
Well, perhaps. I don't know if this has anything to do with his real character or not. The point that he seems to go on to make is that this is really the content of the collective unconscious that's being projected onto him. I mean, maybe he was like that, maybe he wasn't. I don't know. But either way, she says, you are not a bit like that. But that's clearly not enough for the transference to end.
Well, yes. And also, in a way, he is like that to a lot of people who have not become their own parent, because his dispassionate, observant, subjective, but very often objective observations could come across as cold and mean or evil magician or sinister to someone who is not yet unthreatened or sovereign within themselves. But like Jewel said, conscious and unconscious, she's conscious that he's not that. She's unconscious that she's that.
Gordon, I resonated with what you said because, and Nicholas, that reading you gave, I wrote down one phrase, when I am with you. Because in my subconscious, and that's why I'm glad, Jordan, you referenced that other part, was I will be projecting, because I debated, is it transference or projection onto that person? I'm going to say my unconsciousness as I defined it today, my learned history through my collective families that I have had personal experience with. So that's where maybe I'm having the trouble in with that. And and then I will get within, I thought, why did I think that? Because when I had those feelings before, I don't know if I transferred or projected onto somebody characteristics and behaviors that I had experienced. And therefore, when I got in their presence, I went, they're not that way. My feelings were not in proportion to what was actually taking place with events. And so as that moved forward, then sometimes I found out, as I heard you say, Skip, yeah, some of those things were true, but maybe they were mild, but they were red flags. And so I'm going to stop at that.
Yeah. Okay, let's go on and get a little more substance here. It is at this point that many a treatment comes to a standstill. There's no way of getting out of the toils of the unconscious, except for the doctor to raise himself to the subjective level and to acknowledge himself as an image. But an image of what? Here lies the greatest difficulty of all. Well, now, the doctor will say, an image of something in the unconscious of the patient, whereupon she will say, what? So I am a man, and a sinister, fascinating man at that, a wicked magician or demon? Not on your life. I cannot accept that. It's all nonsense. I'd sooner believe this of you. She is right. It is preposterous to transfer such things to her. She cannot accept being turned into a demon any more than the doctor can. Her eyes flash, an evil expression creeps into her face, and the gleam of an unknown resistance never before seen. I am suddenly faced by the possibility of a painful misunderstanding. What is it? Disappointed love? Does she feel offended, depreciated? In her glance, which lurks something of the beast of prey, something really demoniacal. Is she a demon after all, or am I just the beast of prey? The demon, and in this, a terrified victim sitting before me, trying to defend herself with the brute strength of despair against my wicked spells. All this must surely be nonsense, fantastic delusion. What have I touched? What new chord is vibrating? Yet it is only a passing moment. The expression on the patient's face clears, and she says, as though relieved, it is queer, but just now I have a feeling you had touched the point I could never get over in relation to my friend. It's a horrible feeling, something inhuman, evil, cruel. I simply cannot describe how queer this feeling is. It makes me hate and despise my friend when it comes, although I struggle against it with all my might.
Yeah, think about how many friendships and relationships have just, that's been the sticking point.
Yeah, precisely. You know, you see something evil in your friend and you just turn your back on them sometimes.
Well, I think it's important here, especially in this last couple of paragraphs, to make the distinction between what is a projection and what is transference. And projection is typically that one person has a notion, be it correct or false, that someone else has similar thoughts, feelings, and emotions. So they put them on them as if they're true when they're really theirs. Whereas transference is actually the process by which the items are actually shifted from one person onto another, so that it's kind of fire sale.
Jordan, I'm going to ask you to expand on a comment that will help go further with what you said. Could I say that a transference would be the feelings that I had with another person? So I'm looking at feelings that I had actual experience with. That when somebody said to me, are you projecting or transferring onto someone? And I said, I don't know, I'll have to think about it. But your definition here helps me. And when I looked back, I'm thinking back, it is neither. It is true. So it would be a projection then, according to you.
Well, actually, that's interesting that it can be both, but I'm no psychologist. I mean, I'm not a mental health professional, but it seems that oftentimes, like Nick said, some of the sticking points are that people buy into someone else's projection. Like you said, oh, I'll need to think about that.
Gotcha.
When in the moment, wise in time, you can say, no, that's not me. And so there's do you know yourself well enough to not have a charge when you say that's not me? Let's look at that together in regards to how that came about. I mean, you're not blaming them, but you are hitting the tennis ball back over the net. But the thing is, I think when people unconsciously, someone says, oh, you need to think about this, about yourself. Well, and then they say, oh, okay, because I'm in empathy with my partner and they asked me to, so I'm going to respect to. There are times when you're actually facilitating the transference of them offloading the whole thing to you, when in reality, from that point forward, you will never be trusted again in regards to that piece because you took it on. They'll say, there's some little piece of truth there. So I think that we, especially early in life, take on other people's stuff without knowing it, thinking we're thinking about it, thinking we're entertaining it, and in a way that's somehow making better relationship, when in reality it's no, knock that tennis ball right back over the net. That's not mine at all. I mean, so it's a tricky dynamic. It's a certainly tricky dynamic. So I kind of think, I don't like to say it's either or. It kind of, you kind of have left foot, right foot. It can kind of be a both and, except when the whole thing is offloaded to someone, then the transference has occurred. From my perspective.
Comment here really quickly. I think that you can project onto anyone. It doesn't matter if you have a relationship with them or not.
Right.
I don't know Elon Musk, but I can certainly project a million different things onto him, or Jeff Bezos or Trump or what have you. Don't know any of those guys. Could all be weird stuff about me and have nothing to do with them. And whatever my projection onto them wouldn't necessarily affect me. But if I were in a relationship with somebody, if I know somebody, whether it be a partner or a friend or just a coworker or something like that, there's a relationship where both parties are affected. And that's much more the case of transference, where both parties enter into this reciprocal kind of change. And it's not, I think it's also the case where projection, once the kind of hook on which you hang your projections is gone, then it just ceases back into oneself. But transferences aren't necessarily broken that easily.
Very good.
Yeah, it's a perfect way to put it, I think, because then the unconscious offload of the whole thing has actually shifted to the other person. So it very much is difficult. I mean, they're not going to want it back because they didn't like it about themselves in the first place. And so, yeah, I really like the way you put that.
Yeah, and Jung talks also about the countertransference, which was, I think, his way of saying, not only will there be a transference with the patient and their unconscious, but also I'll be affected by them and they'll be affected by me. So they'll take on some of my stuff and be giving it back to me, but I'll take on some of their stuff and be giving it back to them. You've got to be really careful in that situation to know whose baggage is whose, I suppose.
I think so, because the displacement has to be in balance. Otherwise, if someone's just a pleaser, they're going to receive. But the problem is that's going to deplete them because there's too much offload and not enough reciprocal exchange.
I tell you what, you two are just worth a counseling session, because mine was not a personal relationship. It was a business relationship with an employee. I know what to do. I just go to their supervisor. again, this was what I was talking about. My unconscious said, you can't say anything bad. I'm not. That's why I use the word true. It's a true statement. I have facts to back it up. Got you. So
Nice.
that there, the counter transfer and all that help me with Carl Jung tonight. Thank you, Carl.
Okay, welcome, Jiro. Haven't seen you in a while.
Who's up next on the book? You are?
Do you want to
I'll
go
take
ahead?
it. Or actually, let's read. Giro had a comment. It's like karma. Karma goes both ways. Too much giving, too much taking. It's all about balance.
So true. So true.
Yeah. So that's
And
Annabelle. Were you?
Female, I will say, if I can real quick, the female in earlier times was not equal to man in so many roles. And I think that's where part of my struggle is the situation that I'm in. You don't talk about the male, blah, 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 whatever. Got it. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Unless
We
they're
do
good
here.
guys. Unless it's you three guys, which y'all are awesome, because y'all are not my history. You are my future.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, I'm sorry I had to go away for a minute, but I was offered a brownie and my wife didn't put Cool Whip on it. So I had to get
His
some Cool Whip.
wife didn't put Cool Whip on it, he said. So he did. He's capable.
Yeah, I think I don't know about Nick and Skip, but I kind of feel. I mean, in my younger years, my middle name should have been Vigilante, because it's like it wasn't about don't tell me what to do. It's ooh, watch this. But Skip's got a brownie with Cool Whip, and I'm not interrupting that. So
Yeah, it's hard. So
46.
yep. So go ahead, Jordan.
okay, paragraph
There you go.
146. This remark throws an explanatory light on what has happened. I have taken the place of the friend. The friend has been overcome. The ice of the repression is broken, and the patient has entered a new phase of life without knowing it. Now, I know that all that was painful and bad in her relation with her friend, will devolve upon me, as well as all the good, but it will be in violent conflict with the mysterious X, which letter X, variable, which the patient has never been able to master. A new phase of the transference has started, although it does not yet clearly reveal the nature of the X that has been projected upon me. Let me read the next paragraph to go with this one.
Yep. Go ahead.
One thing is certain, if the patient gets stuck in this form of transference, the most troublesome misunderstandings lie ahead, for she will be bound to treat me as she treated her friend. In other words, the X will be continually in the air, giving rise to misunderstandings. It will inevitably turn out that she will see the demon in me, since she cannot accept it in herself. All insoluble conflicts come about in this fashion, and an insoluble conflict means bringing life to a standstill.
Wow. Okay. Nick, do you want to comment on that?
I think it hits a little too close to home. for me.
Probably not. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah. I think to keep it, for me, simple, Jung says when two people interact, there's inevitably a reaction or not. And so here I think an insoluble conflict means bringing life to a standstill, means they came to a just flat line, no reaction with their relationship with themselves in themselves. And so their footing is gone. And in a sense, they're cast afloat without any experience to grab to or to grab a hold of. which sounds relatively dangerous. I mean, a professional there to kind of kickstart the heart, so to speak, to push them along towards a shore, or give them a boat or an oar or a shark.
Yeah, I mean, very definitely. If you can't get the other one to move, then that's it. That's how my marriage ended, my first marriage.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't get my wife to stop attacking me about things she'd been attacking me for 15 years. Every time there was any little dust up, like I put the wrong silverware out on the table or something, wow, it immediately got spiraled up into the stratosphere. And I just couldn't take it anymore. I didn't want it in my life anymore.
Well, and that's where the conflict becomes silence and boring. The standstill of, it's so loud and it's so argumentative all the time. That becomes normal, like white noise. And then you start to get clarity and you become the eye of the storm, but that's when it can get the standstill, because they don't stop that. And the volume, regardless of, they can't hear a whisper, or you can't hear a whisper. I mean, either way. But again, the insoluble conflict. So I mean, that comes to a point where sometimes it's, cut bait, because this is not working, and not in that moment, flippant way. And over time, where no, this is way past point of diminishing returns. It's wasting.
Well, and of course, at the same time, I met my future wife, who I've now been with for whatever it is, close to 36 years. I guess it is 36 years. And I guess we passed 36 years on the 2nd of January. And, there was just no going back. I mean, because the choice was either keep running up against this wall of criticism, which never changed, or go on with my life with someone who wanted to live an international life,
and who knew which book she would take to that island. I mean, that when she faxed you that, I mean, that's a connection. I mean, she's sharing this intimate detail of, if ever I have to, then this. I mean, that's pretty big stuff. I mean, it sounds mundane with the book, but it's the book she chose, and it's still with her. I mean, it's
right, very much so. And it's the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, which I had not read at that point, but and we were together by that time. In fact, we had been together for nearly a decade by that time. But I said, like you said, that must be some book. And when I read it, yep, it was some book. And the problem that came up 25 years later is that the author, who was the center of this 40,000 strong Tibetan Buddhist group, who was not ordained, but was very famous because of this bestseller that he wrote. He got into some peccadillos, apparently, and he started to abuse members of his group, which, boy, talk about how poison that is. It destroyed his group very quickly. And of course, that's sort of an archetypal story in religious groups, that the holy man gets himself in trouble very often. We've seen it in the U.S. very often in Christian groups.
Well, and there's an evolution of character of the psyche there too, because anyone in a teacher, reader, therapist, counselor, professor role, people, even if you suck, they still look up to you. And just because of the positioning of the way the parents, I mean, are or are not present with them. And you have to be very aware to almost think back to what was I like when I was that age, to empathize, to make sure that you're respecting, not to allow them to draw themselves in further, where wisely you can assist their development without the unethical aspects of just what you were just talking about. I mean, there's a consummate awareness that has to become almost natural, I find, in any person of authority to lead. And that's why I like your general's quote, there go my people, I must follow them. So instead of being in the limelight, he's leading, just like an alpha wolf will lead from the back of the pack. I mean, the three strongest are in the front, the alpha female is in the middle, and the oldest are in the front, the weakest are in the front. And that way there are three strong ones as the spearhead of the wolves, the beta female or the alpha female in the middle, and then the alpha male in the back. So he sees it all, and she sees both ways. She's aware and she's in it. She doesn't have to run to it. So there are three positions of authority in that quote unquote pecking order. That's more of a dynamic than it is a pecking order. Yeah. I mean, the only time the pecking order comes into play is when there's a threat to authority and one's trying to usurp the other. But then otherwise, betrayal doesn't happen on the trail. I mean, it happens when they've stopped.
Right. So I apologize for diverting the conversation to my brownie, but it was quite good. I could not resist.
I have to say, I'm not going to ever fault a brownie with whipped cream, because I can make that synchronicity to anything else beautiful or good.
Okay. All right. So
read these next two chapters. I mean, these
yeah,
next
let's
two
go ahead.
paragraphs.
Yes, let's do. Go ahead, you do it.
Annabelle, would you like to read those? You want me to?
Pardon?
Yeah, sure, I could.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Bringing life to a standstill. Yes. So now we're 148.
Yes.
Right.
Or another possibility. The patient could use her old defense mechanism against this new difficulty and could simply ignore the point of obscurity. That is to say, she could begin expressing again instead
repressing.
of
She could begin repressing again.
I have you noticed how many words I've changed since I've written just these three lines? Okay.
Revision 2, 19.
That is to say, she could begin repressing again instead of keeping things conscious, which is the necessary and obvious demand of the whole method. But nothing would be gained by this. On the contrary, the X now threatens from the unconscious, and that is far more unpleasant. Whenever such an unacceptable content appears, we must consider carefully whether it is a personal quality at all. Quote, magician and quote, demon may well represent qualities whose very names make it instantly clear that these are not human and personal qualities, but mythological ones. Magician and demon are mythological figures which express the unknown, quote, inhuman feeling that swept over the patient. They are attributes not in any sense applicable to a human personality, although, as intuitive judgments not subjected to closer criticism, they are constantly being projected upon our fellow men to the very great detriment of human relations. Magician is one of the tarot cards, and demon, I think, is not referring to the devil, is it? I mean, is Jung already thinking in terms of those archetypes?
I think magician has both positive and negative, but demon definitely goes to this dark force, it feels, his implication.
Right. And Jung was not into tarot per se. He never said too much about the tarot. So
Uh-huh.
we said a lot about it for a year.
Yeah, we sure did.
Yeah, but he never did it. So it would be wrong to project upon him what any thoughts
Yeah,
about
because
that.
the primary text, Jung and Tarot, was not written by Jung. It was written by someone about him with tarot. But I think it's really important where he says the magician and demon are not qualities, are not personal qualities or human
Yeah.
qualities, but mythological ones. And that's a really wonderful tool of a cue, even just in listening. If someone goes into a mythological character, I mean, if they're calling you something that strong, it's an immediate tell that they're projecting, or that it's something else other than you or them. There's a quality here that's mythological, and that makes it almost, you need to listen more deeply then.
Yeah, and it keeps being applied to me in my business career, where I've been called the magic boy or whatever, and it's nothing magic about me. I'm just doing practically nothing, but they're projecting a magical aspect. So
Mhm.
it's
Yes.
like
The mythal. I'm sorry, Skip. Go ahead. You're still.
well, I was just going to say there was this one occasion when, as an afterthought, I had 1 square inch of Teflon pile. Okay, this is a thin pile made out of Teflon thread. And I sort of said as an afterthought out of my briefcase, oh, you ought to look at this. And the engineer at Toyota took it over to the window, rubbed it up and down on the window, which was weeping, and said, we'll take 80,000 meters, please.
And then right across the windowsill, and it wipes the window clean.
Right. And so the point was that from the perspective of my business partner who had taken me into that meeting, it was total magic. He didn't, he was breathless that it happened. And it wasn't particularly magic. I just asked the engineer to try this.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that whole scenario then went down in less than 15 seconds. Everything else would lead up to that point, but
right.
Yeah, I also just want to point out that in the case of right here, the reference between, the connection between magician and demon and the reference to mythology might have something to do with Merlin from Arthurian.
Merlin.
So he was always said to be the son of the devil, but also connected to King Arthur. And he was kind of his.
Well, the son of the devil and a pure virgin or something, wasn't it?
Something like that, some weird combination, but it's just strange because people often hear of him and think of him in a more positive light. But it's also interesting that for thousands of years people have been burned at the stakes for being a magician, and then we see a magician tarot card, and it's like, oh, it's cool, he's got all these implements before him, but I think it was actually something that was a little more evil throughout.
It's interesting, that story, the of a demon and a pure virgin. That's the virgin birth all over again, but on the flip side, in the shadow. Yeah,
in the shadow side. That's right. And of course, the story goes that Jung on his stone didn't put anything on the backside of the stone. He put it on the sides and in the front. But in the backside, he intended to put, but never did, the
La Cri de Merlin, I think.
Yeah,
the cry of Merlin.
Yeah, the cry of Merlin, because Merlin has something to give and to show people. And obviously he's an important guy at various points in the Grail legend and other places. And this is exactly Colleen's point, where she's been making, she's been creating Lilith, and Lilith has apples. Lilith is the serpent, or turns herself into a serpent, and is the serpent that gives Eve the apple, and they're the apples of truth and knowledge, and nobody wants to take them. And so Pauline at one point has this pile of ceramic apples, and she says, so many apples, so few takers.
This is really speaking to me. This Carl Jung has just opened up my whole world. I was not very much, I didn't know the word archetypes, nor did I know much about fantasy, Merlin magicians and all of that. I recognize those names, but I can't say too much about it. And because of studying Carl Jung, it has broadened my reading tremendously. And I even picked up Aristotle the other day to have a book on him I purchased that. So I appreciate studying Jung for this reason. But with all the comments that I'm saying, the collectively that you men have just made, and the smile that's coming from Annabelle, and the look on her face of listening to this and taking it in, I'm saying, again, Carl Jung has manifested himself to me personally through your comments and the readings.
Right. And the point is that we have to have one foot on each side of the equation. We have to keep both good and evil in consciousness, because there is good and evil everywhere.
And that's why I'm sorry, I thought you were finished too.
Well, I mean, that's fine. Go ahead.
No, and that's what I was going to go right to that point, Skip. So thank you. Is that when I was saying projection, or whether it was transference, if I had to label a person using Carl Jung's archetypes as a negative, then that was judging, and I liked that. But what it taught me to do, to find my archetype, if I wanted to project, transfer to that, then that meant my humanness was getting in, and I needed to detach completely from that situation. So thank you. Yes.
Yeah. And
Shiro made some good comments too in the chat in regards to the magician and the archetype. Let me pull this out, and I'll I'd argue Jung would maybe see demons as projections of the shadow into the outside world, and he'd read Christian myth or Buddhist quite similar as an allegory. And he goes further to say, in the alchemical interpretation, the magician has to name and ban the demons, which you could interpret as first seeing the own dark side, and then, well, sort of treat it with therapy or ritual. And in the tarot, it's basically the first step to go into the archetype that starts the journey of facing change, solve it, burn it out, both as a collective and individual process.
But it never burns out. It's a neurosis, and you have to put a fence around it and say, and unconsciously, well, it's over there in my unconscious, but I'm not going to go there. That's what you have to do.
Well, and that's one method. My method is to look at it as a sacred ember. And if I go there, I expect to be relit and burn. And so I can either put a fence around it, or to me, I prefer to use the wood for something else. And if I put a wrought iron, it'd melt anyway. But it's like you said, I think we're both saying it's indelible in one way. If you say neuroses and I say sacred ember, it's in a sense referring to the same thing.
Yeah, and obviously you can get creativity out of that side of the psyche.
Right.
And many people do. Many people, as Jung said, many people need the dark. And well, okay, we can read on here. We're going to have to anyway not get all the way through this chapter tonight because it's pretty long.
You mean to grab 150?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. These attributes always indicate the contents of the transpersonal or collective unconscious are being projected. Personal memories cannot account for demons or for wicked magicians, although everyone has, of course, at one time or another, heard or read of these things. We have all heard of rattlesnakes, but we do not call a lizard or a blind worm a rattlesnake and display the corresponding emotions merely because we have been startled by the rustling of a lizard or a blind worm. Similarly, we do not call one of our fellows a demon unless there really is something demonic in his effect upon us. But if this effect were truly a part of his personal character, it would show itself everywhere, and then a man would be a demon indeed, a sort of werewolf. But that is mythology, i.e., collective psyche, and not individual psyche. Insofar as through our unconscious we have a share in the historical collective psyche, we live naturally and unconsciously in a world of werewolves, demons, magicians, etc. But these are things which all previous ages have invested with tremendous affectivity. Equally, we have a share in gods and devils, saviors and criminals. But it would be absurd to attribute these potentialities to the unconscious, to ourselves personally. It is therefore absolutely essential to make the sharpest possible demarcation between the personal and the impersonal attributes of the psyche. This is not to deny the sometimes very formidable existence of the contents of the collective unconscious, but only to stress that as contents of the collective psyche, they are opposed to and different from the individual psyche. Simple-minded folk have never, of course, separated these things from their individual consciousness, because the gods and demons were not regarded as psychic projections and hence as contents of the unconscious, but as self-evident realities. Only in the age of enlightenment did people discover that the gods did not really exist, but were simply projections. Thus the gods were disposed of, but the corresponding psychological function was by no means disposed of. It lapsed into the unconscious, and men were thereupon poisoned by the surplus of libido that had once been laid up in the cult of divine images. The devaluation and repression of so powerful a function as the religious function naturally have serious consequences for the psychology of the individual. The unconscious is prodigiously strengthened by this reflux of libido, and through its archaic collective contents begins to exercise a powerful influence on the conscious mind. The period of the Enlightenment closed, as we know, with the horrors of the French Revolution. And to the present time, too, we are at once more experiencing this uprising of the unconscious destructive forces of the collective psyche. The result has been mass murder on an unparalleled scale. It's reference to a footnote which states this was written in 1916, superfluous to remark that it is still true today, 1943. This is precisely what the unconscious was after. Its position had been immeasurably strengthened beforehand by the rationalism of modern life, which, by depreciating everything irrational, precipitated the function of the irrational into the unconscious. But once this function finds itself in the unconscious, it works unceasing havoc, like an incurable disease whose focus cannot be eradicated because it is invisible. It strikes close to home. Individual and nation alike are then compelled to live the irrational in their own lives, even devoting their loftiest ideals and their best wits to expressing its madness in the most perfect form. We see the same thing in miniature in our patient, who fled from a course of life that seemed to her irrational, Miss X, only to act it out in pathological form and with the great sacrifices in her relations with her friend.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a ton of information in that paragraph.
Do you want to touch that third rail?
There was one line in here that I wanted to pick up on. Let me see if I can go back through and find it.
Okay.
But of course,
I've missed these long paragraphs.
Yeah, I'm sure.
They're my favorite. I'd be curious, Nick, what did jump out at you? Because there is so much information there.
I had something highlighted, but maybe I'm mistaken here. It's so strange. It feels like when I'm reading in the group, like I read most of this beforehand just so I'm prepared, but it feels like when I'm reading it to the group, I'm almost not actually processing it. I'm just reading out.
Yeah.
I almost need to go back and read it.
It's kind of a hypnotism, isn't it? Well, we can certainly see this in 21st century life, in our own lives, because you saw it precisely in the people that were involved in the January 6th event, because it was clear that they did not know. They were unconscious of what they were being caused to do. Okay. They got into the chambers of Congress and they had no agenda of what they were going to do. They were unconscious.
Yeah, when they
got pulled along by this collective psychic epidemic, they were not conscious of why they were doing it, many of them.
Yeah, you saw on their faces when they reached the well of the Senate, and there was just this, okay, Dad, now what? And are we there yet? There was just blank.
Right, and it was really a case of affect that was blank. Exactly that. Mm-hmm. They just did not. They were just unconscious of what was going on and what its implications were, and so on.
I found the section that I wanted to zero in on here.
Go ahead.
It starts at the top of 150, or almost at the top, where he's saying, we've all heard of rattlesnakes, but we do not call a lizard a rattlesnake. And we do not display the corresponding emotions merely because we have been startled by the rustling of a lizard or a blind worm, thinking it to be a rattlesnake. And then just after that, similarly, we do not call one of our fellows a demon unless there really is something demonic in his effect upon us. And that really struck a chord for me, because it's always an issue or kind of a point of contention for me when I'm thinking about projection, because it brings up the question of, so does that mean that every single thing that bothers me about another person really has to be something in me? And I think what I take from this is that Jung is saying that it's not necessarily something entirely belonging to the other person, but only that the condition has to be present for us to attribute whatever that quality is to the other person. Mm-hmm. And I think later he says that, maybe party A and party B are neither a demon, and just more or less that the condition is there for that attribute to be projected onto one another. But it's also interesting, I'm reading this other book called The Way of the Image by an analyst called Yoram Kaufman. And in that, I think this might even be his point of reference, because his entire method for working with the dream is obviously centered around the image, but he's talking in terms of there being an objective approach and a subjective approach, which is what Jung was talking about in the former chapter and now in this chapter. Mm-hmm. But he's saying that, often it's the case that when people work with the dream, they take a more subjective approach. So I dream of a snake. I tell you everything that I think about a snake. And that's kind of the working basis. But then there's also, the process can be enriched by kind of taking in some of the objective information about a snake, whether it be the reality of the snake itself, or the mythology of a snake, or what the stories pertaining to a snake over thousands of years. And if you bring that in, there's this kind of perhaps a dialectic that happens between each of these things. And I just thought that was relevant to what he was saying here, where he says, we've all heard of rattlesnakes, but we wouldn't call a lizard a rattlesnake or something. And in that book, he's also pointing out that if there is a massive discrepancy or disparity between somebody's associations to something, say somebody has a dream of a shark and they're delighted by the fact that they're swimming in waters with a shark. It's in reality a very dangerous situation, but in the dream they're delighted by that. That would be a sign that there's something really off. They're somewhat out of alignment with this complex or with this thing in the unconscious that they should perhaps be a little more somewhat leery of.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that gives us some talking points or not, but that's all stuff that I felt was kind of clustered around these couple of lines.
I think an important talking point you just brought up was not being leery of those sharks is not bringing some kind of awareness or consciousness into the unconscious. And if you're leery of them, you have brought some consciousness and some awareness and some ownership, some participation in a way. And you don't have to be afraid of monsters in the dark. I mean, there's the old quote, I have loved the stars too much to find evil in the dark. But the reality is that it is there. So I think there's a lot of talking points there with being leery of the sharks, quote unquote, I mean, as a metaphor, sharks, alligators, what have you, or not. And what does that generally indicate, or is it personal? But I think Jiro said in the chat that even people who do some of the most consummate evil, they thought they were right. And so philosophically, there's an ethics issue that's also brought up there as to the good of the collective, or the benefit of the collective.
I mean, I think that brings up the issue of relativism, but I also think I think there are absolute goods and absolute evils, and in that sense, that I think that argument kind of collapses on itself to some extent. But it's also interesting that there are objective realities to things as well. Like the sun is hot. You had a dream that you were standing on the sun and you were delighted about it. Maybe there's something in there about an abundance of solar thinking or something like that. Maybe one is two.
Whatever.
Yeah, you became you yourself, your identity became as hot as the sun or as bright as the sun. I mean, in a way, so that you were, in a sense, a child of or a piece of, but you weren't burned.
Apply a relativistic lens to that, one could say, well, this is what the sun means to me, and it doesn't mean the same thing to you. There's no objective reality to what the thing is, and that's. I don't think that works with a lot of Jung's approach because he's very much an essentialist.
Mm-hmm. Well, we had. Go ahead.
I'd like to just say I really liked that reading, Nicholas. And would you put that book in the chat?
Sure.
So I can look up even the page, because that really spoke to me. So to me, outside of this group, I'd like to make it a talking point. Yes. For another day.
Yeah.
Because, and Jordan, I loved your comment. I love the dark too much to hate the stars.
Actually, well, that's funny. You flipped it. I've loved the stars too much to hate the dark. But I like that you flipped it. That's beautiful. That's perfect. That's the both and going on right there.
Well, and that's where I am in my head, because where I am, y'all are very light years away of me and Jungian. So I said it my way. Okay.
Well, no, and what's funny about the way you said it, you still love the stars. I've loved the dark too much to hate the stars. Well, that means you don't hate the stars.
Means I don't hate a person, but I don't like the way, so I can separate.
Right.
Right. Nice. And this also relates to our national neurosis, in the sense that I've heard some people criticizing folks because they're paternalistic, and getting angry with them because they're men. And
that's true.
I've had to say, hey, now wait a minute, those are my fellow Americans, and they're the salt of the earth, and they kept me alive when I was in Vietnam, and they're part of America too. So we have to find a solution that's broad enough that includes everybody, and doesn't exclude anybody. That's the issue that we have. We have to get consciousness we have to help people have consciousness of the fact that we can't exclude anyone. And, you know, this is obviously the punchline of Amanda Gorman's poem, where she says, quoted exactly since I've been selling it to everybody.
While you're looking for that point of protocol, I think I misremembered the quote, Jewel. I think it goes more to the effect, I'll have to look it up, but I think it goes, I have loved the stars too much to fear the night.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Something like that. But
Yeah.
But to me, this all ties together with the discussion and the fact of what Nicholas read. And then he gave me a term to help answer the quote that Chip used tonight in reference to how, in respond, thinking what I said last week, I don't understand how, because it has always been my objective reality. I can't understand why prejudice is out there. And that's my objective reality.
Yeah.
And Skip's got, Amanda Gorman's really,
Yes,
Right.
really a powerhouse with this.
Well, I love these poems. This poem is called What We Carry. And one of the quotes in here, which isn't the one I originally was looking for, but I love, is loss is the cost of loving, a debt more than worth every pulse and pull. We know this because we have decided to remember. And, you know, that my personal love for the United States is worth every pulse and pull. And that's the point. But the last three lines in this poem, which is a 2-page poem or 4-page poem, is we walk into tomorrow carrying nothing but the world. And the point is that, well, the name of the book is Call Us What We Carry, and we are all carrying the world, each and every one of us. And that means every feature of it. We're all carrying the world, and we can't be exclusive anymore. I mean, in earlier centuries, we could be exclusive and have castles and our own territory and that sort of thing, but that and still we can have, you know, private property, but you know, we're pretty much interchangeable around the world these days. I mean, when Djokovic goes to Australia, and you know, people are stunned that the Aussies wanted to keep him out of Australia, so he couldn't play in the Australian Open. But finally, you know, he's part of the world too, and they had to let him in. You know, it would look pretty stupid if somebody else won the Australian Open and he wasn't there, because he's won like the last 4 or something like that. So it wouldn't be much of a win. So we have to, you know, we have to let these people, we have to let everybody that has something to contribute what they can contribute. So anyway, do you want to read on, Annabelle?
Sure. And now I really am lost.
Yeah, 151,
Yeah.
page 95.
Oh, you did read a long paragraph there, Nick.
Yeah.
There is nothing for it but to recognize the irrational as a necessary because ever-present psychological function, and to take its contents not as concrete realities, that would be a regression, but as psychic realities, real because they work. The collective unconscious being the repository of man's experience, and at the same time, the prior condition of this experience is an image of the world which has taken eons to form. In this image, certain features, the archetypes or dominants, have crystallized out in the course of time. They are the ruling powers, the gods, images of the dominant laws and principles, and of typical, regularly occurring events in the soul's cycle of experience. Insofar as these images are more or less faithful replicas of psychic events, their archetypes, that is, their general characteristics, which have been emphasized through the accumulation of similar experiences, also correspond to certain general characteristics of the physical world. Archetypal images can therefore be taken metaphorically as intuitive concepts for physical phenomena. For instance, ether, the primordial breath or soul substance, is a concept found all over the world, and energy or magical power is an intuitive idea that is equally widespread. I'm gonna read that footnote, the soul's cycle of experience. As indicated earlier, the archetypes may be regarded as the effect and deposit of experiences that have already taken place, but equally they appear as the factors which cause such experiences. Shall I go on 152?
I know that I tend to do this, and I can't help myself, but there's a really interesting parallel between Platonism and the idea of the ideas or the forms and this, because Plotinus, who was probably the greatest Neoplatonist and who was essentially just helping to explicate what Plato said in his dialogues, goes on to say that the forms or the ideas are their own causes. They cause themselves and their paradigms, which cause other things, which is a really, really profound thing to meditate on, because there's essentially, I mean, they're only second to that which is above them, which is an entirely different conversation. But
well, that's a wonderful comment, because Plotinus not only just an astrologer, but brings up the concept of sui generis, this suigeneris, that which comes into being all of its own accord. That's with the forms you're saying there. It's occurring, the self-generated.
Yeah, I don't know. We might be thinking of two different people. Plotinus has treatises against astrology. He was not. You might be thinking of Iamblichus. But anyways, that's I could go off into that. But anyways, the point that I was trying to make with that is that at an earlier point, like he says, is indicated in paragraph 109, and we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. He says initially that archetypes are impressed upon the psyche by external phenomena, by the passing of the sun over the earth every day, or the earth around the sun every day. As such, they make these patterns in the human mind. But he's also saying that these patterns might cause the external world too. And it's so strange that later in Jung's life, I know, tying this back into what Annabelle said with Catafalque and Peter Kingsley, right. Jung says in his interviews, nobody understands me. And I mean, nobody. And it's so strange. On the one hand, he says, you know, the gods don't exist, they're just projections. But then on the other, he says, people don't understand me because I think the psyche is real. So it's like he's saying, the gods aren't real, but the psyche's real. So the gods are real, and nobody understands me. And it's
later on, he says explicitly, God is the unconscious. The God image is your unconscious, and God is the collective unconscious.
Yeah, but it's no wonder nobody understands the guy. I often wonder if he understood himself. I mean, it's not to say that there's not clearly a ton of genius there and a lot of value to derive from his work, but it's like he's so slippery throughout his entire career. I mean, every other paragraph.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It
Well,
has
you
been
know.
a journey. It has been a journey to study the man, but at the same time, it's like nailing Jello to a wall.
Yeah.
Yeah, you waste a nail and you mess up the wall.
The Jello is still there, but I always explain the archetypes as like a river bed, which maybe we could define the form of the riverbed at some point through the DNA. I'm not sure, but we certainly are far from that now. And the archetype, that's just the form, but the activated archetype is when there's energy put through it, like putting water through a riverbed. And once you do that, then the archetype manifests, it constellates. And so, obviously the clearest one is the mother archetype, which every woman has in her potentially, but only when she conceives is there actually energy put through that archetype. And then all of a sudden and very quickly, they say, oh my God, this is, I'm changed. I'm a mother now or whatever. But Annabelle, you should speak to that rather than me.
Yes. I mean, I can speak to the mother one, which is that, yes, manifesting it, for one thing, being pregnant was definitely life-changing internally and externally.
Truly.
Because one does exist in society too. So I was a pregnant woman. I wasn't just a woman. And then, yes, I mean, being a mother, every woman is a different mother. No two women are the same mother.
Right.
Even going into it, I took these birthing classes, right? And we would learn these things about this is what you're going to do. And it was like, if there were 12 women in the room, no one did it, whatever that particular thing was, the same at all.
Yes.
And a lot of the choices that I made once my daughter was born, if you would have suggested to me 2 months before her birth that I was going to make those choices, I would have said, you're crazy. That's not what I'm going to do. And it's not who I am. And everything became quite different. Although on the subject of the dog and the father that we were talking about before, I actually had a reflection about a dog who we got when my daughter was 4. We had a choice of the litter, and it was essentially, giving my daughter the choice, and, little puppy. But I was thinking to myself today about that dog and what might have been the difference between my love for the dog and my love for the daughter. I'm not sure, now on reflection, because I did wholeheartedly embrace that dog, and the dog did change who I was. And at that stage, when my daughter was 4 years old, we were approaching that kind of pivotal time, which most psychologists say is around the age of 6, and you're actually kind of drifting apart. You're not that locked mother-daughter or mother-child entity. Anyway. But when you were Skip, when you were just going to bring up an archetype, I thought maybe you were going to bring up one of these, for example, that one, which is on my desk right here. Because I feel as though what you just said, even your language of it, constellating and riverbed, and you were using some of that same terminology when we were talking about all those tarot cards.
Yeah, well, I think when you're young, you think you can direct your life. Okay. You think you can direct your life by going to college or, joining the Marines or whatever it is, going to law school. You're going to direct your life. And as long as you do X, Y, and Z, everything will turn out hunky-dory. Or as my partners in business used to say, well, if we get this investment, then we're through and everything will be hunky-dory. But that isn't true at all. And so, as soon as you get that $2 million investment, oh my God, you have to start raising money again. And so the Hanged Man is about reaching the point, and Jordan is more of an expert in this than mine, but the Hanged Man is about reaching the point that you're going to let these energies flow through you. You're going to recognize them as they go, and you're going to manifest your call, your divinity, and you're going to just not get all upset about it. Whatever happens, happens. And you can't predict how it's going to go. I mean, I couldn't predict that I would break my leg when I was at the end of my Marine Corps career. I couldn't predict when I was studying law that I would detest the practice of law. I could not predict those things. And so if you have to, be hung there on your one leg and say, sort of que sera, sera.
Yeah.
You have to throw something in, and it isn't that I haven't found uses for my study of the law. I mean, I'm still using it, but I have one client, and he has to receive bad news right away, right? As was said in The Godfather, right? I have one client, and he insists on bad news immediately. And, that's what Robert Duvall said to the movie producer. But each of us has one client, and it's us. And when we get bad news, which we all do get it. And when we get bad news, we should recognize it immediately and react to it, change our outlook on life so that we can improve our lives.
Yeah, don't waste trouble. That's where you find the next treasure. And Annabelle, I'm glad you pulled up the Hangman, because I think that you're in a hangman moment, you're afloat in clarity. That is capital E enlightenment. Now, it may not be full nirvana, uncut, but at the very least, it's powerful enlightenment, sunbeams through the trees, sunbeams through the leaves. And I mean, I look at, say, Jung, when asked, do you believe in God? And he said, I have no need of belief. I have a deep knowing. I mean, that's a hangman moment statement there, where it's absolutely clear. And so I'm glad you held up the hangman there, because a lot of people fear it, but it's afloat in clarity. I mean, you may be the only thing in the ocean, and does it dissolve you or does it connect you? And that's I think a point of each of us does that differently. But
I just want to read one passage here of Holder's poem Patmos, and if I can find the correct passage, maybe. Well, I can't, it's a long poem, but you can look it up on Wikipedia. But basically, he's saying wherever the trouble is, nearby is the rescuing power. Okay. And that rescuing power is, in fact, the unconscious.
Mhm.
And so the key, and Jeffy says it on page 41 of Liberating the Heart. In one sentence, he says, the purpose of Jung's whole psychology is to make accessible to us that healing power which resides in our unconscious.
Mhm.
And so the secret here for all of us is to recognize what the healing power is telling us.
Mhm.
And it, as it said in the Bible, God works in mysterious ways. You have to appreciate, some people have mysterious ways where they lose a child or whatever. But or in the case of my first wife, she lost a husband. But at the same time, the rescuing power was that she found a new husband that fulfilled her needs. Okay. And, and he and I have become good friends and over the years, and we've known each other for 40 years now. So we're good friends, and he fulfilled something that she needed, which I could not provide. And so that was the rescuing power for her. Jiro says, came to my mind, pretty good image maybe by David Bowie for the hanged man, that he turns himself to face himself. Yeah, you have to recognize your fate and your call.
And as you've brought up many times, the indwelling eyes of certain paintings, you can tell they're not looking out. There's just this universe that's looking in.
Right. And, the key is to live your life well and to live it authentically. You're going to make mistakes, but you have to make those mistakes and then have your unconscious tell you, how to move on properly. Okay.
Well, even practically, I noticed when I had my own architecture firm, if I avoided a problem, it took 4 times the length of time I avoided it to fix it. So if I was on it within 48 hours, okay, I get it solved, no big deal. But if I avoided it for 2 days, it took 6 more days, so total of 8 days to fix it. Because basically you have to deal with the unravel points. And God forbid I ignored bad news or something for a week. That's through a whole nother invoicing cycle. And I'm distracted trying to fix another problem for 4 weeks, 3 more weeks on top of the 1 week I avoided it. And then really the flex time there makes it 5 or 6. I mean, the longer ones start to gravitate more problems that are you can't not avoid because you have to focus on the other ones. But literally I could almost run a graph to a T that if I avoided something, it took a total of that time frame plus 3 more equal time frames, 4 times the length of avoidance to solve it. Or to at least get myself swimming out of the hole,
Right. And in some of our problems, like COVID, for example, you look at the result of ignoring it or of denying it. I was reading today, there was some conservative woman who was passing misinformation about COVID and, accusing Biden of being weak, but she got COVID and she died from it. And so you have to face the truth.
And the pharma companies do want to make profits off of the vaccines, which then
surely
makes them not so available to parts of the world where people are then going to get the virus, which is simply a communicable disease, which means anybody who has it it'll just get passed around. So
And that's
if you
where
don't
we have
stop it,
to,
it'll
we
keep
have to
moving.
wake up and stop it, not only here, but everywhere,
Yes,
And
everywhere.
then because it's a business, they're not so available to part with it
of course
because
not.
it's
Yeah.
part of their margin. I mean,
Exactly.
Yeah. And, okay, so it's after 10. Nick might be folding up here. Do you want to stop here, Nick, or?
Yeah, I probably should move towards the bed myself. So yeah, I'm gonna check out everybody. I'll see you all next week. It's good to be back with everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, me
good
as well.
night,
Good to see you.
night.
Good to have you back. Thank you, Nick.
Yeah, all right, so we completed 151, is that correct?
Said 151.
Yes, we
Okay.
completed 150. I put a mark after it is
Yes,
equally
it
widespread, and then
was.
we're on what year?
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, okay. So I have marked that, and we'll see you all next week
Wonderful.
with
Sounds good.
that. Okay, thank you, all the listeners on YouTube for being here. It's terrific to have you here. And
And good to see Kiro back.
yeah, it's nice to see you back, Jiro. Because I think you are in Germany, if I recall correctly, and that makes it quite late there.
early.
Germany, or was he in Netherlands, Finland?
I don't recall.
4 a.m.
Oh,
It's
he's
4
at
a.m.
4 a.m. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's he's in Europe someplace.
Yeah, Germany. You're right, Germany, because that's France, Germany, 6 hours ahead.
Right. Okay, so I hope you can get some sleep, Jiro. And meanwhile, I will see you, Jordan, on Wednesday. And
Wednesday and then Sunday morning.
right, and
I won't. I'm not accepting the star invites. You should have seen his wife when she came out to pull us out. She said, "You guys didn't take the four-wheeler. Why?" And he said, "But his Subaru has heat. It's too cold." So I have to say, I felt cross-checked, like, oh, the two little boys went out to play. Stuck
and
all night.
hello, Rhea. It's nice to see you here. And we look forward to seeing you on Wednesday. Maybe we'll talk about doing our Wednesday sessions a little bit later in the day. That might help me, but we actually moved this time to 1 o'clock to support Gray Yates, but Gray hasn't joined us for over a year.
Yeah.
And so maybe we can find a different time. But Rhea, maybe I'll see you again in early March. That's the current plan. I mean, aside from the Wednesday meetings, but the current plan is to go to California again. And it's breathtaking what we're doing.
It is.
And, so Jiro says I look 10 years younger with my stash. Yeah, I feel younger just because I put all that medical stuff behind me pretty much. And so now I can go on and live my life for a while longer.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody's going to tap on my shoulder at some point and say, okay, that's it. But until that happens, I'm going to keep living it.
Well, then you should keep that Halloween cartoon I sent you around, that Death shows up at Aunt Margaret's door, and she said, "Oh, look, your costume's so real. It's just such a good job." And he goes, "This isn't a costume, Margaret. I've come for your soul." And he doesn't finish the word soul. He's like, "Geez, full-size Snickers. No, Margaret, we're good." And so Death leaves.
Oh yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. So who knows?
No, good to see you guys.
At my age, I could go another 25 years like Annabelle's father did.
That's right.
Yep.
Yeah.
A lot of work to do.
Yeah. So Jiro says, according to Terry Pratchett, death comes, ask what you believe in, and then sends you to hell, heaven, an old tomb, nirvana, whatever.
So we get to select from the menu.
Yeah. Well,
That's funny.
my dictum is when you're dead, you don't know you're dead. It's only difficult for your family. And when you're stupid, it works the same way.
The same way. Yes.
So we all need to wake up and
Yeah.
understand that God is not supernatural, God is supranatural. And that's a pretty important distinction that the theologians are afraid to talk about. But I think, anyway, that's my impression. And I was talking to Paul Vanderklay over emails today about the part of the Reformed Church that split off. There's a hyper-conservative part of the Reformed Church that split off because the central part of the Reformed Church isn't conservative enough, and these 53 churches want to ban gay marriage and LGBTQ. And so these 53 churches are going hyper conservative and creating a new denomination. The problem with that is that they've accepted the devil's trick, because the devil's trick is that you excommunicate your children because they're gay or something like that, and then you might have you might have what you think you want, but what you lose is your children and your relationship with your children, and that's the devil's trick. And
then you see them on the battlefield on the other side.
Exactly.
Chip, may I ask you to either name or send it in a private chat what that group is?
I can send it to you, Jewel. I don't have it right at my fingertips, but I definitely can send it to you.
Private chat within the whole group, so that it wouldn't be verbalized out to the world.
Well, let me see if I can find it quickly. I did send it earlier today.
Thank you.
So I probably can just do a search on my sent messages. Second.
I'm gonna go ahead and get going. I'll see you on Wednesday at 11 a.m. Mountain, 1 Eastern.
Okay.
No, you're still in Mexico, but just their time. I wasn't geographically involved. Anyway, goodbye. I'll talk to you later.
Right.
I got it.
Oh, yeah, I'm still in
Okay.
Good night, everyone.
Jewel, here's the link to this.
Good night,
story
Jordan.
Good night,
about
Annabelle.
the-
Night, Joel.
Night, Zero, Jewel.
Okay.
Night,
Good.
Joel.
Good night.
Good night. So I put the link to this church, this Reformed church that's leaving the denomination, but becoming its own Reformed church, in there. And the issue is, when you do that, you give up your children. It's the devil's trick to deny your.
When we go off there, I'd like to share something, but not now. Never mind.
Okay. All right. Yep. All right. So we'll finish now. And thank you everyone on YouTube for following us tonight. Peace to all. And let's see, Jewel, do you want to call me, or you want to be on Zoom in my private YouTube?
We could do that, or I just don't want to keep. Is anybody else?
Okay, I'll send you a link here
That'll
shortly.
be great. Because
Okay.
you go to bed now.
Check your email, and I'll send you the link. So peace, everyone.
Thank you.
Jiro said he would head out so that we didn't have to do that, but we still have people on YouTube, so we do have to do it.
That's what I
And-
didn't know, so that'll be fine. I'm gonna end
Yeah.
up to check
Just
out.
check